Welcome back, everyone out there in podcast land. We are back with another episode of Music That Matters right here on Different Strings, a guitar adjacent podcast. I am your host. My name is Wes, and I'm here with my co-host. Actually, I'm your co-host because we're co-hosts, and I'm here with my friend Andy, who is your co-host. Andy, please say hello.
Hello.
And this time we are going to talk about a little 1-2 punch, which is 2 albums, not one, but it's called Music That Matters, not Albums That Matter, Album That Matters. And it's a band you may have heard of called ZZ Top.
Oh,
But
right
before we
into
do
it.
that, right into it, before we do that, Andy, please tell everybody where they can find us on the internet.
Again, I do this every
Again,
week, kids, and I feel like at this point, if you don't know where to reach us, you're just not paying attention. But I'll do it one more time because Wes asked me so nicely. Please visit us at differentstringspodcast.com or email your questions or topic ideas to differentstringspodcast@gmail.com or contact@differentstringspodcast.com. Also, we're on Facebook, Different Strings Podcast. And if you're listening or watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, comment, and do all the algorithm things. And finally, please be sure to subscribe to Different Strings Podcast wherever you consume such media, such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio and what are the other ones? I don't know. So you don't miss another action-packed episode of this very, very cool podcast. Wes, what are we doing with ZZ Top this week?
we're going to talk about their 1-2 punch Eliminator.
Classic. Ooh, shiny too.
And Afterburner
Ooh, in space.
in space. So this album's from 1983. And this album's from 1985.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to let you know that both of these are original from the 80s that I bought and actually kept in really good condition,
That's
which is crazy
insanity. That's
because a lot of my
insanity.
record sleeves got wrecked. So everybody, you've heard of ZZ Top, and they were huge in the 1970s. They came out of Texas like the most welcome heat wave with their swampy, boogie-fied American classics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just got paid. And I'm going in chronological order here. Just got paid, waiting for the bus. Jesus just left Chicago. LaGrange, heard it on the X. Tush, I thank you. I'm bad and I'm nationwide. And of course, cheap sunglasses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their first 2 albums sold respectably. Their next 3 albums went gold. That's 500,000 copies per. They put out Diguello in 1979. That album went platinum. That's 1,000,000 copies. But their 1981 album called El Loco only went gold. That's, like I said, 500,000 sales. And that's got probably 2 of their most well-known songs and 2 of their most innuendo-laden songs, Tube Snake Boogie and Pearl Necklace. Right? The album with Pearl Necklace only sold 500,000 copies. And
Mm.
that, when you sell 1,000,000 copies and your next band only sells 500,000, that feels like failure. I know that's a weird thing to say, but especially to the record label, that feels like failure. So for the guys, that must have felt like kind of a gut punch.
Yeah.
And no doubt, the folks at their record label were suddenly paying really close attention and wondering what their next album was going to do. Now they had some personal issues in the late 70s and they took an extended break. That late 70s break is when Billy Gibbons, the guitar player, and Dusty Hill, the bass player, started growing their iconic beards, the ones that they're, now known for. And the drummer, whose name ironically is Frank Beard, and he's the one with no beard,
Right.
he went into rehab to deal with hard drug addiction problems. So they were, I don't want to say they were teetering, but they were definitely not on the rise at that point.
Right.
And in the eyes of their record label, they must have seemed like a much more risky operation than perhaps we're thinking of them now in 2024. So, and all through the 70s, ZZ Top didn't buy into any trends. They stuck to their brand of straightforward rock and roll. I consider them kind of an American version of AC/DC. They found a sound that worked for them, that resonated with the listening public, and they put out album after album that sounded like that. Now, on El Loco, right, that has Tube Snake Boogie and Pearl Necklace, there were just some touches of keyboards, synthesizers, minor experimentation. But when they started doing the demos for their 1983 album, Eliminator, that all changed. Frank had built a studio, had built a home with a recording studio in it. And they'd been doing some research into popular music, and they figured out that one of the things that helped a song be popular was a driving rhythm right around 124 beats per minute.
It's very specific.
It is. And there's, tons of research to back this up. So one of the things that they were hard on themselves about was their tempos, like any good band is. But Billy kind of wanted to nip that. And so he wanted to play at a steady tempo and keep this driving rhythm. So they started using a drum machine in the demo process.
Huh.
And Frank especially embraced electronic drums, which were really kind of in their infancy in the early 1980s.
Sure.
So they demoed out most of the album, most of Eliminator in Frank's studio. Then they went to Memphis to record for real. And here's where things get interesting for you and I. We haven't even talked about the songs on this album yet, but we're going to talk about the gear, right? So Dusty is a well-known Fender P-Bass player.
Uh-huh.
And as a matter of fact, the P-Bass he played the most is the one that looks like a Telecaster. That was his signature model. And, reverse headstock and one small pickup. It looks like it's the same bass that Sting used to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what amps Dusty used, but he was well known for using a variety of Ampegs and Marshalls in the studio at this period and on the road. Now, unfortunately, Dusty passed away in 2021. He was kind of health-wise, he was going downhill for a while, and I think he knew he was going to pass away eventually, sooner maybe than anybody wanted to. He was only 72 years old. But his bass tech, a guy called Elwood Francis, replaced him in the band at his suggestion. So anybody that's throwing any shade towards Elwood needs to stop, because that's what Dusty wanted to happen. He wanted the band to continue, and he wanted Elwood to take his place. At any rate, in the early 1980s, Billy was a Dean guitar player.
I remember.
Yeah, even though he's probably most heavily associated with Les Pauls from his earlier career. At this point, he was playing Dean guitars. He liked to put DiMarzio super distortions in his Dean guitars. And here's the thing. He was using, now we think of Billy Gibbons, the Reverend Billy Gibbons, mind you. And in 2024, we consider him to be an absolute tone hound, a tone monster, if you will.
If you will.
On Eliminator, he used an amplifier made by a company called Legend, an American company out of New York called Legend. He used an amp called a Rock and Roll 50, right? So 50 watt amp. But here's the thing, Andy, it's a hybrid amp.
Really?
Yeah, but it's not like Ty Tabor of King's X. with a tube preamp and a solid state power amp.
It's the other way
As a matter of
around.
fact, I take that back. I don't think Ty's amps had a tube preamp. I think his amps were all solid state. It's not like a common hybrid where you have a tube preamp and a solid state power amp.
It's
This
reversed, like
one's backwards.
The Music Mans were like that.
Yeah, so it's a solid state preamp and a tube power amp.
Yeah, very strange.
And he ran the amp full chat. So they had to take a different approach to recording on Eliminator, and they did it with thousands of punches. And they're still recording on tape, mind you. Thousands of punches to, because every time he picked his hands up off the strings to move his hand, the amp would feed back.
Jesus.
Yeah, so they'd record a chord and then punch in and record the next one, et cetera, right? So when you go back and listen to that album, you hear no finger squeaking noises. None.
Because they just punched everything and edited everything.
Yeah.
That's crazy. They basically pretzeled or puzzled all of his parts together.
Yep.
Oh,
And
that's so
Billy
nuts.
is well known for using a Mexican peso coin as a pick. Apparently, he hammers and files them into a pick shape, and that's what he uses. So that's part of his really aggressive tone. So I think Dusty sang lead on a couple of songs, but Billy
Yeah,
sings
he
most of
did.
them. Little trivia thing that I found out today: Jimmy Jameson was one of the primary backup singers on this album, Eliminator. You might remember his name from the band Survivor,
Eye of the
right?
Tiger.
He came into the band after Eye of the Tiger. He was the singer for their second big phase. I think their big hit in that phase was a song called High on You. The album was called Vital Signs or something like that. Really great album, by the way, but I digress, right? So Eliminator hits the airwaves in spring 1983. And here's the real big thing, right? ZZ Top capitalized on this at the time new thing that you may have heard of. It's called music television. Us kids in the early 80s referred to it as MTV.
Mm.
You familiar?
When videos were new.
Yeah. And so the videos featured these guys with the giant beards and the big sunglasses. They had, sheepskin covered custom guitars and that super fancy tricked out 1933 Ford Coupe, not to mention a small running pack of very attractive young women in heavy makeup, big hair, and tight clothes,
But they
as was the
also,
fashion of the
yeah,
time.
right. And also, didn't they all wear matching suits and sunglasses and the hats? Like they
Yeah.
really they what am I trying to say? They kind of like were reborn as a new band with this album.
Yeah, they really did. And it worked because they did have a new sound. If you listen to El Loco
Hmm.
and then you listen to Eliminator, I'm
Night
not going to
and
say it
day.
sounds like a different band, but it sounds like a different band,
Hmm.
right? Highly produced, electronic drums, right? Synthesized bass, but
Formulaic hit writing.
well, yeah, with sticking to a kind of a beat per minute area,
And
slick
yet,
production,
and yet
stylized.
there's still that ZZ Top Texas attitude between the guitars and like the pick harmonics and the
Yeah, and
bluesy
the boogie,
soloing. Yeah, the whole
the
feel.
boogie is still there. Like it's identifiable. You go, wow, that band sounds just like ZZ Top. Well, no, it is ZZ Top, right? And so all of that, the production, the sound, the videos combined in this perfect storm of exposure for Eliminator. 4 singles from the album, and you know them all. Give Me All Your Lovin', Sharp Dressed Man, Legs, and Got Me Under Pressure,
Yeah, just all
right?
great. But even the deep cuts on this album are really cool, man.
Yeah, I think the best, my favorite song on the album, it's certainly my favorite song that's not one of the singles, is the second song on side two. It's a song called Thug. It's right
Yeah.
after Legs,
Yeah.
right? So you've got Legs fades out and Thug starts up, and it's got some really cool, funky, like popping on the bass. And
Yeah.
there's definitely a drum machine going on in there. And as I listened to it today, I remembered that it had this popping bass line, but it also might be a synthesizer because it does kind of sound like the theme song from Seinfeld just a little bit, but I don't know if that keyboard existed in this time. So at any rate, Thug is very cool. It sounds unlike anything else on the record, and
Yeah.
it leads into TV Dinners, which is definitely another one of my favorites. And TV Dinners reminds longtime fans that ZZ Top has not lost their sense of humor,
That's right.
because a lot of their songs are kind of jokey and a little goofy, and TV Dinners is definitely one of those. And then they've
Yeah.
got If I Could Only Flag Her Down, which is a super bluesy song that doesn't really fit with the rest of the album. It kind of sticks out as a result. Now, based on all this, Eliminator sold Diamond in the United States. Do you know
It
how many
was
copies that is? Diamond, right? Gold is 500,000, platinum is 1,000,000. How many copies is Diamond?
10 million.
10 million. 10 million copies, right? That means about 8% of the population of the United States in 1983 bought a copy of Eliminator.
They went from 500,000 the album before to
To
10
10
million.
million.
What do you think the record label was thinking at that point?
Cha-ching, right?
Oh my God.
So
But
they went
crazy.
on a big tour, and then they wrapped up the tour and they went back in the studio and recorded another album called Afterburner, which came out in 1985. Now, here's another thing. It's going to sound like an insult. Afterburner only sold 5 million copies.
Is that all?
Is that all? Right?
It
But
didn't go diamond, but it was more than platinum.
it went half diamond. It went 5x platinum, right? So, and it's got Sleeping Bag, Stages, Rough Boy, Velcro Fly, and Planet of Women were the singles off of that one. And Rough Boy is probably, and this is going to be controversial to anybody that loves ZZ Top. Rough Boy is my favorite ZZ Top song, hands down. And I love ZZ Top, and Rough Boy is my favorite song.
Wow.
So, talking about Afterburner, I found a quote from a guy called Stephen Erlewine, who writes for a website called All Music.
Hmm.
And I wrote this down word for word from his critique of the album. And this is a quote. Well, if you just had your biggest hit ever, you'd probably try to replicate it too. And if you were praised for being visionary because you played all your blues grooves to a slightly sequenced beat, you'd probably be tempted to not just continue in that direction, but to tighten the sequencer, graft on synthesizers, since it'll all signal how futuristic you are. The problem is, no matter how much you dress ZZ Top up, they are still ZZ Top. And he went on to say, that's the end of the quote. He went on to say that this was the only record ZZ Top could make at the time. And here's the thing that he said that resonated with me about Afterburner. It hardly exists out of that time. And as much as I don't want to agree with a music critic that this is an album that I really love, he's not wrong.
Mm.
And even though these two albums sound really close to each other, Afterburner definitely sounds dated in 2024, right? Here we are 40 years after, almost 40 years after it comes out, and it sounds like an 80s album, where Eliminator sounds like a timeless album, right? So with Afterburner, I'm not sure there's any actual mic'd drum sounds on it. Everything to me sounds like a sample, and it's got a lot more sequencer, but it is still ZZ Top. The songs are really well written. They're meticulously played. And I'm going to offer you another comparison. I'm going to offer you a comparison, and it's kind of backwards, right? Think of Def Leppard, Pyromania, and Hysteria,
Oh wow, yeah, very different records.
right? But clearly the same band, right? Clearly the
Uh-huh.
same songwriting, clearly the same playing, clearly the same production mentality,
Yep.
but the albums are different. And depending on which one brought you to the band, one is amazing and the other one's only just good.
I wouldn't argue with any of that, except I like Def Leppard and I like both of those albums differently,
Yeah, exactly. To me, when I listen to Pyromania, it sounds like an 80s album.
right?
When I listen to Hysteria, it sounds like a timeless album.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of the same thing, only like backwards with these two. Eliminator to me is the timeless one, and Afterburner is the one that sounds a little bit dated.
Interesting.
So we always ask, why is this music that matters? Why is this something that people should be listening to? I think
Mhm.
it's really important, especially Eliminator, but not discounting Afterburner. What ZZ Top did was show that a 70s band could successfully and massively transition into the MTV era. Not every band was able to do that successfully.
No, that's a
And
good point.
they did it by evolving their sound. They didn't sound like a completely different band. You could still, the boogie is still there, the growl is still there. And
Mhm.
probably a lot of that comes from Dusty's bass tone, which was always like just past the edge of distortion, right?
Mhm.
Very, very aggressive bass sound. And they never abandoned their roots. At the core, these are both still ZZ Top albums, no doubt about it. You know, Billy's playing has always been, to me, a masterclass in restraint. He could play so many more notes, but he doesn't. So, despite the really slick production, the lush production of these albums, his lead style, especially, is pretty sparse. And one of the things that I really love about, especially learning to play some of the solos on these two albums, is being able to absorb the ideas buried in his version of blues rock
Yeah.
and turning them into, because to me his soloing doesn't inherently sound like the blues, like I almost said Buddy Holly,
Actually,
like Buddy Guy
to
or
me,
Elmore James or even Stevie Ray. You listen to Stevie Ray and you're like, oh, he's a blues guitar player.
mhm.
Billy Gibbons does not, to me, sound like a blues guitar player, but you can tell his style is very bluesy.
Yeah, I
And
don't know. I hear why. I hear what you're saying. I associate him with a very specific type of blues playing,
yeah,
almost like he invented it.
almost.
His like yeah. So that there's something there's something about his style that it's hard to compare it to the older blues style, but it's almost like his is a whole new thing. And he invented that Texas blues. Like Stevie Ray Vaughan did his version of it, which was very Hendrix infused.
Yeah.
Billy Gibbons has it's more southern blues, I guess.
A little more swampy.
Yeah. And when you talked about his restraint, there's two things I think of. One, There's not a single note out of place
Ever.
ever. You can easily sing his guitar solos,
Yep.
and if you were going to say cover them, you would have to play them note for note because they're
Yeah.
just that, like I said, not a single note out of place. The second
Yeah.
thing I think of when I listen to his stuff is because they're so sparse, you can really hear his finger technique.
Yeah.
You could really, and his picking technique, and the you could hear the harmonics and like the strings or the fingers on the fingerboard. I always talk about like organic. I hate using terms like that to describe guitar tone, but when you listen, even like the outro to Sharp Dressed Man, where you can tell he's sort of improvising, and
Yeah.
you hear that, and it's like he's just sort of laying back and just taking it easy, and like he's just doing this really cool southern blues thing, and it's just perfect. And
Yeah.
I never learned Billy Gibbons solos. I never covered a ZZ Top song. I've never, and so there's he's one of those guitar players where I don't touch it. It's almost like for me, unless I have to learn the song, I just like to leave it because it's magical to me and I don't want to dissect it and
I
get all
get
in
that.
it. I don't know him, Ty Tabor. There's a few guitar players I just don't want to touch their stuff. I just like to leave the magic alone. And Billy Gibbons is one of those guitar players. I really like his rhythms. I'll learn. I like the rhythms because it's just fun and interesting and slinky and unique. But yeah, I like his solo stuff now. BFG.
Uh-huh.
He's the same guitar player. His songwriting's evolved. It's even more swamp and even more like heavy and drippy and all, but he's the same guitar player. I mean, he is so tasteful and so understated and so more about letting the notes sing than he is about putting the hammer down. And I feel like this album is the first where he started to like develop that style. Because if you listen to some of his older stuff, I think he was a little more notey,
Yeah.
but also his slide playing. My God, man, his slide
Oh,
playing
he's
is
such a good slide player.
an iconic. The
And
first slide guitar I ever heard was him.
I don't think there's any slide on these two albums.
Are we sure?
I'm not 100% sure. I did listen
Sharp
to them
Dressed
both
Man is
again
slide.
today.
I think Sharp Dressed Man is slide,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
but there's not a lot
But
of it on the record like there was on previous
yeah.
records.
Yeah, and he's watched some videos of him playing, and he's kind of a surprisingly lazy rhythm player, you know? Like
Go on.
there's not as much movement as it sounds like. He uses open strings a lot
Yeah, yeah.
where many of us might keep them higher up the fretboard,
Okay.
right? So, and I mean, I love the tone on Eliminator, and I'm sure you're as surprised to hear me say that as I am to admit it because, I'm kind of a tone snob. Um, and
But
then
did it not work?
it worked, man. And from what I understand, on Afterburner, and he said this in interviews, that he used a Rockman as his preamp and just
Wow.
line outed it into various Fender and Marshall amps, which were, of course, turned up all the way. Um, right. So the long story being long as it is, if you don't have a copy of ZZ Top's Eliminator, you are absolutely missing out on some fantastic music.
Yeah.
If you don't have a copy of Afterburner, you'll be okay, but it is a really good album too. So I recommend picking them both up and listening to them in the same session.
Okay. Yeah. That's awesome. I did it back to back, and clearly Eliminator is just hands down just an amazing album front to back.
It really is.
Including the songs that weren't the hits, which most times I don't find that to be the case. But with this album, man, all the songs are just so great. So honestly, I think some of my favorites were the non-hits, but that's just me.
Yeah. And I would say, Go see him while you can,
Yeah,
because
he's getting up there.
you know it. Yeah, not only are Billy and Frank getting old, Dusty's passed away, and Billy's doing other stuff now. I mean,
Mhm.
think about it. Think about how you'd feel if your musical brother died.
Mhm.
You know, somebody that you'd been touring and playing with since the 1970s, 50 years.
Mhm.
And suddenly you look over to your right and he's not there.
It's got to be weird.
And yeah, and I know they finished that tour that they were on when Dusty passed away, as a tribute or an homage, not just to Dusty but to the fans.
Mhm.
But I don't know how many more ZZ Top tours they've got in them without Dusty. And his new band is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Not throwing any shade at BFG at all, but it's not ZZ Top.
Hmm. It's
It's
very different.
different,
Mhm.
and I'd frankly be surprised if you saw a BFG show if they didn't throw in some ZZ Top songs,
I mean, why not,
because
right?
it's still Billy Gibbons, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know how many more full ZZ Top tours they've got left in them. So go see them while you can, folks.
Yeah. Good stuff, dude.
Yeah, so you're on the hook for the next one.
Oh, how do I top this one? I'll think of something.
Well, it's not a competition, my friend. It's not a
No,
competition.
that's what you say if you want to lose.
I'm
um,
not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
so folks, please visit us at differentstringspodcast.com or email your questions or topic ideas, please, for the love of God, at differentstringspodcast@gmail.com or contact at differentstringspodcast.com. We're also on Facebook at Different Strings Podcast. And if you're listening or watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, comment, and do all the things that the algorithm gods demand. And finally, please subscribe to Different Strings a guitar adjacent podcast wherever you consume such media so you don't miss an action-packed thrill ride. Wes, what else do we got in the tank tonight?
Nothing. That's it. We are done.
All right, let's see if we can
Donezo.
make. There we go.
There we go. I'm going to finish my water, and this is just water.
And with
And
that,
now
we
we're officially
say
done.
we peace out. Mic drop. Good night.